So we will pick up where we left off with the Vimalakirti Sutra. For those who are new, the Vimalakirti Sutra, there's a couple translations. We're using the Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai's translation, but there's also a translation by Professor Thurman. There's another translation, his was a little bit earlier. Both are good in different ways. The good thing about the BDK version, and the reason we're using it, most of their books come bound like this. This particular text is now available on their website for free, so you can get the PDF. So that's why I'm using that particular one. So since we do record this, it goes on YouTube, anybody can follow along because the text is freely available. So that's a good one to use. So you can read along, or as we're doing, we're reading it and analyzing the text. So that is the traditional way of sutra lecture, kind of a line-by-line analysis. This portion, chapter 3, the disciples, we're doing a roughly line-by-line, maybe section by section is a better way to look at it. So in this section, we see Vimalakirti has manifested this illness, and the Buddha is going through a list of disciples, seeing who will go to call on Vimalakirti since he's sick. So you could think of it, I'm sure at some point your mother or grandmother said, go down the street and check on somebody because they're ill, or take this soup or food to them, or something along those lines. So here we have the Buddha going through all of his disciples, seeing who's going to go check on his good friend and very wise counsel, Vimalakirti. So thus far, 2 of the disciples have said, oh no, not me, because the last time I met up with that Vimalakirti guy, he had some words for me, or he pointed out where I was going wrong in my practice. So as we pointed out, their refusals are not just embarrassment. There's more going on. They realize that Vimalakirti actually has a lot to teach, and they may not themselves have fully even absorbed what he taught them last time, but they probably are aware that his illness there's more that meets the eye to him being ill, and to make the most of the opportunity, someone who is at the same level as him should go. The other reason for the Buddha going through, probably knowing that the disciples will say no, is to highlight what they learned before. So it's a good recap. So the last time you ran into Vimalakirti, what did he say? What did he have to point out about your practice? So we have that going on as well. So it's not just the pick the other guy, or the embarrassment, or the teacher saying, who'd like to answer the question? You're like, I'm not answering, I'm not raising my hand. There may be a little bit of that, but of course, as the sutra, there's something for us to learn from it. So the Buddha's gone through 2 of the top 10, and why they're hesitant to go call on Vimalakirti. They've talked about what Vimalakirti corrected them on, and again, it's not this fear or embarrassment. It's very nuanced, right? And they remember in detail what he taught them. So it's not, I don't want to go because he embarrassed me, or I don't want to go because he made a fool of me last time. They're very specific about what he said, so they can recall it. So however shocking the encounter may have been, I think it's they realize it's a skillful means, and they realize it's a great teaching that Vimalakirti gave them at that time. So I remember this happened to me in college. I had a professor from China, and I didn't go to class on a day that I was supposed to give a presentation. And the next time, and it wasn't like a big presentation, we were supposed to, what's our research project going to be about? So we give each other constructive criticism. So I didn't make it to class that day. And she emailed me and said, were you sick? No. That's the first. No professor ever reached out and said, why weren't you there? I was like, just didn't come. So I was already embarrassed. So I think I better be honest. I said, yeah, I just wasn't prepared. So she said, okay, well, everyone was waiting for your research, and I'd like you to present next time. But before you do, I'd like you to write a self-criticism, and then present the self-criticism in class before you give your research project ideas. So this is very Chinese, to write a self-criticism and then recite it in front of everyone. So I did that. I took up the challenge. And I sometimes now think of that encounter in the same way as the disciples in terms of Vimalakirti's insight. I think it was a challenge, whether I'll take up the challenge and will I grow from the encounter. And in my case, I felt it was a good growth opportunity. And I think the disciples of the Buddha feel the same way about hearing from Vimalakirti. They don't feel torn down or that he was mean in some way. They feel like, oh, this is a really good growth opportunity. So that's maybe is a good opportunity for us to analyze our motivation as well. So always present your research topic on time if you have classmates. So, so the next, who's up at bat next? It's Mahakasyapa. So Mahakasyapa is another one of the Buddha's great disciples. He's known especially for the beginning of Zen. So if at the beginning, Zen Buddhism traces its origin back to a dialogue between the Buddha and Mahakasyapa. So the story goes that the Buddha was lecturing, and there were 3,000 monks or so, and no one really understood what the Buddha was saying. They couldn't understand his teaching. So probably everyone's giving him a look like. And then they go back to their laptop and go to eBay or something. So no one understood. So it says that at that time the Buddha just held up a single flower, and of all the students, Mahakasyapa smiled. So this was the beginning of Zen, where certain ideas cannot be expressed in words; they're expressed in actions, or it's a wordless teaching. So this is considered the beginning. So Mahakasyapa was that particular student who, I understand. Mahakasyapa, though, is going to be very honest and give his self-criticism of his encounter with Vimalakirti and why he did not understand, though, at that time. Mahakasyapa is also known as foremost in austerities. So a lot of the Buddhist disciples, sometimes you'll see this in statuary in Asia. They're engaged in some sort of practice that looks really painful or very uncomfortable. And so Mahakasyapa had gone through a lot of these sort of austere practices. So maybe eating very little or not sleeping for a period of time. There's a lot of different practices that people do sometimes meditatively. So the text says, Kasyapa addressed the Buddha, "World honored one, I dare not accept your instructions to go inquire about his illness. Why? I remember once in the past when I was begging in a poor neighborhood, Vimalakirti came and said to me, O Mahakasyapa, you have the mind of sympathy and compassion, but are unable to apply it universally. You have abandoned the wealthy to beg from the poor." So it starts off pretty direct right away. Like, you have the mind of compassion and sympathy, but you're doing it wrong. So Mahakasyapa, of course, stayed to listen to Vimalakirti's teaching. But what it's pointing out here in the beginning is that Mahakasyapa was making distinctions between rich and poor, and that he was preferring to beg, because at that time monks would go around with alms bowls and beg from neighborhood to neighborhood. And he thought it was in his best interest to beg only from the poor, not from the rich, which might seem counterintuitive to us, but he has a reason. And what Kasyapa's reason was, this sort of maybe undeveloped idea of karma, that the rich have benefited from past life karma. They've done something to gain wealth in this lifetime, but the poor must have done something to not have, the proper karma to have money. So by begging from them, allowing them the opportunity to donate to him as a monk, gave them good karma, right? So I'm going to make up for your bad karma of being poor. I'm going to go around and beg from you. So this assumes a couple things. First, that that's the actual reason they're poor, right? That there's some karmic deficit. And second, that he's so great, I will give you, the luxury of donating to me, even though you're poor. But in the end, it'll work out for you, trust me. So Vimalakirti is going to go on to explain why this reasoning is faulty. And one of them is pretty obvious. Does it mean you're happy because you're rich? Does it mean everything is easy just because you're rich? To quote a famous poet from Brooklyn, more money, more problems, right? So, hip-hop reference. So, does that mean that you're automatically, things are good? So in my experience, I've seen some of the saddest people are the richest, and some of the richest people in spirit are the poorest. So this is going to be part of Vimalakirti's teaching. So it says, Kasyapa, while abiding in the Dharma of universal sameness, you should proceed in sequence in your begging. It is because of not eating what you should practice. It is because of not eating that you should practice begging. It is because of the destruction of one's physical integrity that you should take the lump of food. It is because of not receiving what you should receive that food. You should enter a village with the idea that it is an empty aggregation. The forms you see are equivalent to the blind. The sounds you hear are equivalent to the echoes. The fragrances you smell are equivalent to the wind. The flavors you eat should not be discriminated. Your tactile sensations are like the realizations of wisdom, and you should understand that the dharmas are like phantasms. That which is without self-nature and without other nature originally was not burning and will not become extinguished now. Kasyapa, if you are able to enter into the 8 emancipations without renouncing the 8 perversions, using the characteristic of perversion to enter into the correct dharma, and using a single meal to give to all, making offerings to the Buddhas and the assembly of worthies and sages, only then should you eat. To eat in this fashion is neither to have the afflictions nor to transcend the afflictions. It is neither to enter into concentration nor to arise from concentration. It is neither to abide in the world nor not abide in nirvana. Where there is charity, there are neither great nor small beings, neither benefit nor harm. That is the correct entry into the path of Buddhahood, without relying on the Shravaka vehicle. So, long passage. What is Vimalakirti getting at? So he's pointing out that Kasyapa has made a couple errors in reason. First, this idea that the rich are now benefiting from good past life karma, and don't need to provide alms to gain merit, but that the poor do. So Vimalakirti says, you've got this all wrong. There's also the idea that Kasyapa probably is thinking, if my practices as a monk, I should do some austere practice. Therefore, I shouldn't go to the rich neighborhoods, because the rich neighborhoods are beautiful and clean, and there's something there that may tempt me, right? So I'll stay in the poor neighborhood where everything is dirty and grungy, and I'll always think, I'm doing, I'm living the hard life, I'm fighting the good fight. I'll stay here and I won't be tempted as much. So Vimalakirti says making these kind of distinctions is an error in your understanding of the Buddhist teaching. That really the practice should be that you don't make distinctions, right? Don't see rich or poor. Don't see, clean or unclean. You should really be focusing on, can you actually practice to the point where you go everywhere? You just go around, you receive alms from whomever, and you don't make these distinctions. You don't say, look in the bowl and say, oh, this is poor food. Oh, this is rich food. This is really good. I can't wait to eat it. So what's the danger there? Especially for monks, one of the reasons the danger is, you start eating it with gusto and you're like, oh, this is so great. And that then encourages someone to then make more of that food and cook for you, which then you become a burden. So the original idea was that you took whatever was left over, right? You were begging for whatever the people had, so you accepted whatever you got. Not to let's make sure we go around the back of the special French restaurant and beg, because I know they've got good stuff, right? As you go everywhere. So that's the benefit. So there's a sort of short-sightedness in Vimalakirti's reasoning on that hand. And there's another short-sightedness that Vimalakirti is pointing out. Is the Buddhist teaching about just gaining merit, right? Is the whole point just that you donate to monks and then you get a better rebirth next time? So Vimalakirti is pointing out to Kasyapa that you're sort of, instead of giving them the teaching, you're just trying to give them a slightly better life. But the teaching is supposed to be more valuable than that. You're selling it cheaply, right? You're cheapening the teaching in this way. So he said that's a really bad way to look at it. Even though you've rationalized it as you're doing something good for people, really, right? You're keeping them in the situation. You're limiting their, their potential. So the other thing is, Kasyapa has this concern that he will be distracted in a pretty place, right? That he doesn't want to go to a place that is too nice, that he wants to stay grounded by staying in these poor neighborhoods. This is kind of understandable initially. If you hang out as a monk all the time in Beverly Hills, maybe it's easier than if you hang out in the ghetto. Right? So maybe you should spend more time there. So where do monks still go on alms rounds, begging? Thailand. So in Thailand, it's still legal to do and encouraged by the community. And if you go to Thailand, you'll see monks begging everywhere. They're in rich neighborhoods, they're in poor neighborhoods. They're in the financial district, they're in the red light district. And that might seem odd, right? That you have ladies in the night on the corner and monks going by. But the practice is to treat every place the same, not make these distinctions. Because what's the alternative then, right? Then you're just sort of cozying up only to the rich, or you're saying, well, those people over there aren't good. So the Buddha's teaching is this very radical teaching to see everyone equally, right? Rich and poor, doesn't matter your background, doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter your language, right? No matter what. That's difficult to do, very difficult to do. And you see it especially amongst, religious people, that sometimes, they only want to ride in, the member's car that's fancy or something like that. So it should be this practice of not making these distinctions. So this is one of the things that Vimalakirti points out. You could think of it like Kashyapa saying, well, I should stay away from Las Vegas. I shouldn't beg up and down the strip because I'm going to see things that will distract me. I'm only going to beg in more humble areas. So this is another one of Vimalakirti's criticisms, or constructive criticism, right? That he's telling Kashyapa, you need to make sure that your mind doesn't move. You need to make sure that your heart isn't moved, that these things don't distract you. Then you can go anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. So if we flash back to the second chapter of the sutra, we see Vimalakirti in the drinking house, right? It says that he's in the pleasure house. But when he goes there, he has a transformative effect on the people. So he's not like, oh, look at that, That's not his demeanor. His demeanor is very serene, that he can go anywhere and his mind isn't moved by that, right? He can go to the concert and he's not tapping his foot. He's just like, oh. He doesn't get caught up in the show. So this is different. Specific to the Heart Sutra, you'll see, we go through the Heart Sutra and it'll say, no eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. And there's a portion of this teaching where Vimalakirti is pointing this out to Kashyapa, saying, if you really don't see a distinction between the eye, the ear, nose, and tongue, right, then you can eat anything, you can see anything, and you see it all as equal, right? So if someone gives you very fine food, you just say, okay, that's nutrition. If someone gives you very poor food, that's nutrition, right? So, a lot of people, they get involved, especially in Eastern religion, they think, oh, then I have to eat a certain way, right? Well, I don't eat that food, or I won't eat that food, right? So can Kashyapa say like, oh, Twinkie, that's fine. Or, oh, organic vegetables, that are hand-picked and, raised with only the freshest spring water. Oh, same thing, right? So not seeing this kind of distinction. Not looking at the label and reading the ingredients, just saying, oh, it's nutrition, right? It is food, or it's just an offering. What you offer is just as fine as what you offer. This person gives $40 million, this person gives 40 cents, same, right? So can you practice that way? So Vimalakirti is saying you're cutting off your ability to actually practice this way by making this distinction. Even though on the outside, it seems like, oh, that's the proper thing you should do. You should go and work amongst the poor only and limit yourself in some way, this way. And Vimalakirti's final critique is sort of like, who do you think you are that you're so great that the poor people donating to you will somehow be catapulted to heaven? And he said, if you don't see that you're making this mistake about making these distinctions, then you haven't made it to that level where donating to you is going to be this great karmic benefit to them. This is important because this distinction is exactly what our practice is supposed to eradicate. There's a temple I went to in China, first time I went to visit. It dates from the 500s. And there's a mural on the wall of when the Buddha went into the Buddha's death. So he's laying down, and all the people have gathered around, and they're mourning his death. And I was staring at this mural. I was like, wow, it's a really big mural. And the longer I stared at it, I thought, oh wow, every little face in the mural, the people are different. And then I looked closer, and I'm like, it's every ethnicity, right? The animals had come. You have people with Chinese faces, people with Afghanistan faces, African faces, European faces, right? And I thought, but this was ancient China. They didn't have to do that. But they did. Because even the murals is teaching in not having distinctions. Right? They didn't just make everybody look like them. They went out of their way to paint every person they could think of or ever read about. And they would paint elephants coming. And have you ever seen the Japanese elephant? Japan had never actually seen elephants. So if you go to a Buddhist temple, the elephant looks like, it has a trunk. They wouldn't just by written descriptions, but it has really short legs that are like wrinkly. And it looks kind of like, I don't know, like a dump truck with like stubby legs and a trunk. I mean, they had never seen one. So they're trying to draw it just from the travel journals of monks that had been to India. So it looks all funny. So the same idea, like there's animals in there that they had never seen, but they tried to draw, right, from someone's travel journal. But going out of their way to say it, to be as inclusive as possible. So this is a inclusivity policy, right? It's a non-discrimination policy at the highest level. So this is what Vimalakirti is pointing out. So he says, Kasyapa, if you can eat according to this understanding, then you will not render void the charity of those who feed you. Right? So you're not, if you haven't practiced this way, then whatever people are giving you is wasted. If you can understand this teaching and you are practicing this way, then truly that merit is great for them to donate to you. So it says, at this time, the World Honor One, the explanation I heard was unprecedented to me, and immediately I generated a profound sense of reverence for all bodhisattvas. I also thought, this householder's eloquence and wisdom, being as they are, how could anyone who hears him not generate the intention to achieve anuttara samyak sambodhi, so complete enlightenment? From now on, I will never exhort anyone to undertake the practices of the Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha. Therefore, I cannot accept your instruction to go inquire about his illness. So here, Kasyapa is talking about, I'm not going to, from now on, at that point, I had the benefit to practice for the benefit of everyone, right? I lost this distinction. I wanted to actually dedicate my practice to everyone. It wasn't just going to be for poor, or just for rich, or just anyone, for everyone. And I encourage other people to practice in the same way. So this is his focus. Who's next up to bat? Disciple number 4, Subhuti. So this disciple is considered to be foremost in gifts, especially understanding emptiness. So Subhuti has this deep understanding of emptiness. So there's a problem with talking about emptiness. It's something that's a realization. And even when we go through the explanation here, and I try to shorten it, because one difficult thing about discussing emptiness is if it's not our realization, if it's not our frame of reference, it seems very puzzling. It seems very paradoxical. So if you, in my experience, my opinion, if you dwell on it too long, it can get confusing. It's something you should read, practice, take a break, come back to. And over time, through practice, it's easier to grasp. And then eventually, you have some insight into what the teaching's talking about. But it can be one of the more puzzling ideas in Buddhism initially. So maybe don't go get every text written about emptiness and just delve in right away. So it's something that you may mature into. It's probably a better idea. However, Subhuti is supposed to be foremost in understanding of emptiness. So of course, what do you think Vimalakirti is going to point out? That he doesn't have a good understanding of emptiness. Right? So the Buddha then told Subhuti, you go inquire about Vimalakirti's illness. Subhuti addressed the Buddha, World Honored One, I dare not accept your instruction to go inquire about his illness. Why? I remember once in the past, I entered into his home to beg. At that time, Vimalakirti filled my bowl full of food and said to me, O Subhuti, if you were able to be universally the same about eating, then the Dharmas are also universally the same. If the Dharmas are universally the same, you should also be universally same about eating. If you can practice begging like this, you may accept the food. So first, there's something to know about monks' bowls. They're not small. They're actually quite big. So you didn't necessarily know when you're going to get your next meal, and it's they're pretty deep. So it's not an eating bowl. It's pretty large. Oftentimes they go back and share amongst each other. Somebody got more, somebody got less. So you made sure you could carry it all. So for Vimalakirti to fill the bowl, Subhuti has nowhere else to go. He has no need to go to another house on his alms begging. So Vimalakirti has given him everything he could possibly need. So there's some backstory to this. So it says, if Subhuti you refrain from eradicating sort of lasciviousness, anger, and stupidity. So Subhuti, if you can get rid of your lustful feelings, yet are not equipped with them, if you do not destroy the body, yet accord with a single characteristic, if you do not extinguish stupidity and affection, you generate wisdom and emancipation. So he goes on, right? All these different things that seem paradoxical. So he's talking about this emptiness. Subhuti, you should only accept this food if you can neither see the Buddha nor hear the Dharma, nor the 6 teachers of heterodox paths. So he lists out those teachers. If, Subhuti, you can enter into the heterodox views and not reach the other shore, abide in the 8 difficulties and not obtain the absence of the difficulty, identify with the afflictions and transcend the pure dharmas, attain the samadhi of non-concentration. If all sentient beings generate this concentration, if the donors do not name you their field of blessings, if those making offerings to you fall into the 3 evil destinations, if you join your hands with the host of Maras and make them your co-workers, if you do not differentiate yourself from the host of Maras and its sensory bubbles, if you bear resentment toward any sentient beings, if you revile the Buddha, denigrate the Dharma, do not enter the Sangha, and if you never attain extinction, if you are like this, then you accept the food. So this seems paradoxical. Why is Vimalakirti telling him to do the opposite of what he should do? So there's a couple things that Vimalakirti points out here. First, this act of generosity, filling his bowl. There's a couple reasons why he does this. One, Vimalakirti gives first, criticizes second. Second, Subhuti can't run away because his bowl's full. He doesn't have the excuse of, well, I need to go on my alms rounds, right? So he's stuck. So now he can listen. So Vimalakirti first gives him food and secondarily gives him a teaching. So it's double giving on Vimalakirti's point, on his behalf. So he gives first. So that's important to know. This is kind of inherent in Buddhist culture, that which is opposite a lot of times in Western culture. In Western culture, sometimes we say, well, what am I going to get? Why should I go? What am I going to get out of it? Right? What's in it for me? We have that perspective. So Vimalakirti is demonstrating the opposite. He doesn't know if Subhuti is going to run away. He doesn't know if Subhuti is going to listen to his teaching, but he gives first. Right? The first thing he does. He could be out his investment. Right? So there's some trust in this. So first, Subhuti had the opposite perception as Kasyapa. So Kasyapa was begging only from the poor. Subhuti goes to Vimalakirti, who's rich. Right? He's only begging in the rich neighborhoods. So he has the opposite idea, that the rich really need my help. Right? It's not the poor. The poor are the salt of the earth. They'll make it, right? They really understand things. The rich are the ones that I really need to work on. So he thinks if he begs around the poor, they will be motivated to donate as a means of merit to escape poverty. So he doesn't want people donating to him just so they can get out of poverty, right? Because that's a low reason. He wants to go to the rich, who feels if they donate, it's because of a high-minded ideal. So you have 2 disciples that are doing the opposite, but still think, well, I'm right? This is a better way to go about things. So then Vimalakirti points out, although he is foremost in understanding emptiness, he's taking pride in that assumption. Right? He knows it. Well, I'm foremost in emptiness. So he says that pride has become a barrier. Right? The assumption isn't a barrier. So if you have that assumption, then you assume, well, everything will be okay for me. So there's a don't rest on your laurels, keep practicing undercurrent to Vimalakirti's criticism. Third, Subhuti had this kind of remaining distinction of what is true or false, what is a path or a teacher. So he had gone through in his early life a lot of other teachers that taught different things, and he said, no, that's not the right way, I'm going to go learn from the Buddha. Vimalakirti very subtly points out that if you have an understanding of emptiness, you can get something out of any teaching. It doesn't matter where you go. You can, even if someone's saying something completely crazy, right? You can learn from that, right? There's still some benefit to it, so you don't turn your back on it. Maybe, let's compare to politics, right? You need to listen to the debate of the other side, right? Well, why do you think that way? Then you can compromise. You can come to an understanding. But if you just say like, oh, that guy's, he's XYZ, he's crazy, right? Then there's no understanding. Or you learn maybe more deeply why it is you believe what you believe. So there's still something to learn. So this is Vimalakirti's criticism. And then fourth is thinking, well, because I have this understanding, I am this field of merit that if people donate to, they're going to get all this benefit from. And this is, right, one of the basic things is vigilance, is diligence, vigor, continuing to practice. That even if you have been applauded, even if you have been told you're doing well, you don't just stop, right? So Subhuti has, to some degree, gotten to the point where he thinks, I don't need to do any more. So why is this teaching presented as a bowl of food? So food, probably, of all of our genetic or evolutionary drives, is very powerful. We have teeth adapted to specific diets, right? Part of our body is specifically made to eat. We are motivated, right? What you do, of all the things that you look forward to, you eat more often than anything else, right? You don't, I can't wait to go to the perfume counter 3 times a day to smell pretty things, right? You don't maybe run outside to smell flowers or something, but you probably want to eat on a regular basis. So eating can be both very powerful, but also something that we make a lot of distinctions about. It's something that we very easily, you can imagine if you live on begging for alms, and you find that there's a certain neighborhood with a lot of good restaurants, so you might want to stay in that area more. Or somebody's cooking isn't very good, you may want to stay out of that area more. So it's a very easy way for us to make these distinctions. So this is what Vimalakirti is using, this bowl of food as this metaphor, that he's still seeing these very strong distinctions. I'm sure the food in the wealthy area is better, right, than the food in the poor area. Vimalakirti, though, is kind of like a Sherlock Holmes. He's seeing things about Subhuti that are very evident, but maybe he isn't even aware of, right? So it's very much a Sherlock Holmes moment. I can tell that because this, and this, and the person goes, how did you even notice that, or how did you come to that conclusion? So Vimalakirti has this sort of this insight, and very clearly he's looking at one of the primary philosophical problems, is that with Subhuti being so focused on rich or poor, he's making distinctions, and that distinction cuts off his compassion. Right? He hasn't gone out and learned from other people, learned from their way of life. So, in my experience, it doesn't matter rich or poor, American or some other country. There's always something to learn, including, Vimalakirti says, from other teachers. So he says, if you've turned your back on the heterodox path, its other philosophical outlook, then you really don't understand emptiness. Because if you did, you'd still be able to see the truth no matter what the teacher is teaching. So how do we see that? Last year, I had a chance to visit a Greek Orthodox church, and they use a lot of artwork, the same way that we do, maybe more. And they had just a tremendous number of icons in the church. And the priest was talking about how they use the icons, about the spiritual space that it creates, that they're painted gold for the light reflecting, and it sort of approximating the what would it be like to be in the presence of angels, or be in the heavens. And that has an important aspect of prayer. That if you're doing prayer and you have that environment, that you have that inspiration, that the practice is magnified to some degree. You have this study material, right, to look at. It's a visual aid, right, for your practice. And I thought, oh, actually, Shingon has this very similar concept, that we arrange the temple a certain way, the lighting is a certain way, people process in, the space is transformative itself. So even though I wasn't listening to a Buddhist teaching, I gained insight on my own teaching. And so this is something that Vimalakirti is pointing out to Subhuti, saying that if you're making these strong distinctions, you don't have insight, right? You've lost this ability, that if you're only sort of staying in your own club, you're missing out. That you can learn just as much outside of the Buddhist path as you do inside the Buddhist path, if you have the right outlook. So anything can be the teaching. You don't have to make distinctions even in teachings. So that's something that we probably don't think about. And in fact, probably when you go, most religions and philosophies are going to spend a lot of time making distinctions between themselves and others. Why should you stay here and not go to the other guy, right? Rather than say, oh, even if you go to the other guy, you'll still learn a lot. So this is also where Buddhism is unusual, right? Even somewhere else, as long as you have this open mind, as long as you have, you're not seeing distinctions and making, splitting hairs, you'll see this beauty. You'll see, this deep understanding. You'll have this appreciation for religious practice. It doesn't matter what that practice is. So there's no fear in that. So that's where Vimalakirti is pointing out this, error of Subhuti's logic and reasoning. So the final part is that field of merit idea. That, again, just like Kasyapa, Subhuti thinks, I can be a field of merit to the rich, right? If they donate to me, I can help them out. And Vimalakirti says, you're carrying around this sort of pride, right, in your own attainment. And in fact, there's no basis for that. You still are making these distinctions. Only after you make get rid of that distinction, can you actually be this field of merit. So that whole section ends with this kind of very paradoxical and interesting statement that you join hands with the Maras. So the Maras are the demons or the distractions or the things that lead you astray. He says you join hands with them as co-workers. So if you think this way, you're still making these distinctions, then you're actually leading people astray, right? They're not seeing the teaching for what it should be, that you should help people overcome this idea of making distinctions. So Vimalakirti's insight is very good, right? I'm sure he sees this monk show up in his neighborhood with this bowl, maybe this very noble countenance and stature, and I'm here to beg from you to do you a favor. And he just says, you're going about it wrong in these ways. So what I find interesting about these dialogues is the students are able to this is exactly what Vimalakirti said to me. So his words are in their heart, right? They remembered it, they're carrying it with them as something very important, and not with resentment, right? So Vimalakirti is able to talk to them at that moment and approach them in that moment in a way that really is transformative, not just, and this is where we have to be careful, right? Thinking, well, I see something wrong, I should point it out about that person. So is it more about our pride or about us scoring points, or is it actually about helping them, right? When it's truly selfless, then I think the person can hear it as good advice. But if we're just tearing them down, right, there's also about timing. Right? So Vimalakirti is very good at all of these things, the timing. And in this case, I think very good, right? Here's the most wonderful food, all you can eat. I have just one thing to say. So, any questions about this portion? Other than how many more disciples are we going to go through? There's not that many more. But each one gives a pretty good insight. If you look at Kasyapa versus Subhuti, you think, well, should I, where should we put our efforts? Who should we give to, right? Even as a temple, how do we give back to the community? Should we serve the poor? Should we serve those who are most in need? Or should we somehow try to show people who have a lot that they need to give back more? And I think this part of the teaching, the answer is you have to serve everyone, right? The temple's open to everyone. The teaching is open to everyone. And as Vimalakirti's pointing out, it's not about what they get in terms of alms, it's what they're giving in terms of the teaching that's the most important thing. So of all the things that you can give, Buddhists say money is the least important, right? The most important is you give the teaching. That's what's more important. So especially at this time, the point of monks going door to door was part of a practice, yes, but also they were integral in society. You ran into them, you see them, and it's a reminder. Right? So that's Vimalakirti pointing these things out. So we will stop there for this evening, because if we go through too many, it gets a little too much. So reminder, next week we won't have class, so we'll be with our sister group in Hawaii. So hopefully we'll bring back some good stories and insights and maybe some pictures from that visit. And then the week after we'll pick back up. So the calendar online is updated for that. So those classes that are in red are actually in Honolulu, not here. So the ones in blue are Portland. So I tried to put that in there. But if you click on it, it'll show the location. So
I think the meetup calendar needs to be.
I probably need to change that one. Yeah, you're right. Thank you for reminding me. Otherwise, someone will come and I won't be here. I'll be back. So we'll end with the echo of the dedication of merit. So thinking in the same way as the good advice that Vimalakirti gave, as we dedicate merit, we're doing it without distinction, without one person is more deserving of our merit than some other. So we don't want to think in that way. We're trying to really share that feeling of wanting everyone to benefit, as to be equal completely, no matter what might be bothering us, no matter if someone upset us today, even that person, even that situation is worthy of the merit. So that we call it practice because it is. It's not something we can do easily right away the first time. It's something we have to do over and over so that we get better at it. So even if Kasyapa and Subhuti, who go on to be the top foremost disciples of the Buddha, still had something to evolve within themselves, so do we. So that's why we practice this.